That's it.
Are we on? Okay, I'm going to do something weird. I'm not having any slides at all. I think this is my only slide. So I was asked by the organizers just to kind of give the things that Jason was talking about a little bit of perspective from the Argonne PI. So I'm just going to take the next 20 or 15 minutes maybe, talking a little bit about what I've done in the past and what I'm currently doing. I hesitate to call what I'm currently doing a success story yet, but maybe from my past experience, I'll speak to the actual success part of it. And then the last part of it, I just really want to make it more of a dialogue, see if you have any questions or not. So in the interest of customer discovery and survey, I'd like to first ask a question and just get a sense of where people are coming from in the lab versus applied versus basic. So how many people are in EGS division or director? Okay, and then non-EGS, non-SMTPO maybe? Okay, how many people have worked on developing SPPs or working on SPPs and CRADAs? Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit first. So first I'm going to talk about the work that I did developing this, what we're calling a sustained research program in the wind turbine drivetrain reliability. And then I'll talk a little bit about our current work. So just, this will sound a little bit more like just a story, a dialogue of my timeline. But so I first began as a postdoc here about a year into my postdoc. I was kind of facing the inevitable question that most postdocs face is, what's going to happen at the end of this postdoc? Am I going to have funding to continue on with my research? And what direction is that research going to take? And so at that time, I was had the opportunity to take a position at the DOE headquarters doing an M&O rotation. And if you're not familiar with these positions, basically, DOE headquarters will basically offer to support a lab scientist at the headquarters to help them develop or work on their technical portfolio. So I was working in EERE, which is obviously the more applied side within the wind office. And Suresh posed a good question, is why would I do that? And again, I think for me at that point was, the why was, am I going to have funding at the end of my postdoc, and am I going to stay here as a staff? And also, how can I broaden my research a little bit beyond what I was currently working on as a postdoc? So this seemed to me as a great opportunity to try to engage with DOE directly, learn from them what it is that their needs are, rather than me just trying to develop my own program out of my own head, and then see where it went. It was kind of a risky thing because obviously if there wasn't a good match, I would make it maybe get a year into DOE and not have a program to come back to Argonne. So it was a bit of a risk for sure. But fortunately, I took that year-long assignment and I went to DOE, and I didn't go into it with the notion that I was going to develop a program out of it. And I think this is very important. And forgive me if this sounds like a tangent. We're supposed to be talking about maybe more company engagements. This is important because I think, we're never going to have programs that are just fully industry supported. You'll probably be leveraging some DOE support or other agency support. So this is the basis for what my program development was. So at DOE, again, I was really trying to understand what it is that their needs were. I was fortunate from the perspective of, I went into that program with them not knowing Argonne very well, which in essence was an advantage to me because this program office was sending a majority of their funds to NREL, Sandia. They didn't, actually my boss couldn't even pronounce Argonne, he called it Argonne. So that was my job from day one, was to teach him how to pronounce Argonne. But in a way that was an advantage because I was a kind of this unknown entity to them. And it really allowed me to engage with that program office in a way to gain their trust, not look at me as someone that is trying to sell them on something, but really as a partner. And I think that that's what ultimately led to the success of establishing their trust, working with them. It wasn't until about 3 months until the end of my program that I really started to develop an idea to take back to the lab. And the basis of that was built on an existing program that the DOE was supporting in drivetrain reliability, and a lot of this money was going to NREL. Actually, is this all going to be televised? This is a cone of silence right now. Okay. So just see a black spot during this part of the video. So there was an existing program that was going to NREL, and they were basically supporting the office with their tool belt. They were saying, well, the reason why you're having wind turbines fail, their drivetrains fail, are because you don't understand the system loads that go into the components and actually cause them to fail. When we looked into it a little bit deeper, we found that it was more of a material issue that they weren't focusing on, because in reality, they didn't have those tools available to them. So it took me, being a tribologist, being more of a materials person, to say, your real problems are related to the materials. Let's survey the problem a little bit more broadly and see what opportunities there are. Again, it was fortunate that I could approach this being kind of an outsider with the DOE, but we ended up establishing this idea, and this began with one event that NREL was actually hosting, and this was a workshop. It was an industrial workshop. They invited 120 people from all over the industry to talk about what were the real problems facing the industry. And I kind of weaseled my way into this workshop and said, hey guys, what if Argonne would help sponsor this workshop? And maybe get the Argonne logo on your schedules and agendas and so forth. So I came back to the lab. This is the first time I've ever asked the lab for any money. And I asked someone at the lab, can I get $5,000 to help support this program? And, or this workshop? And the person that I was asking said, well, what's my ROI? What's my return on investment? At that time, and this is my first time doing this, I said, I have no idea. This could fall flat, we could get nothing, or, like it really did, it's actually sustained to almost about $6 million over, or sorry, $4 million over a 6-year period. So back to the story, we helped sponsor this workshop. We got the name recognition. We found out through that workshop that, again, it emphasized the point that it was really a materials problem rather than the system loading problem. And we took that back to headquarters, and I said, okay, well, let's focus on that part of the problem. Let's see what we could do. Fortunately, Argonne has a really stellar tribology group and that understands the material aspects to this. So they first gave us an over-target AOP. If you're not familiar with that, that just means you're starting a program mid-year, which then, small investment that ended up growing into a sustained program. So when I came back to the lab, I had this a little bit of DOE money, and I wasn't, not that I wasn't satisfied with that, but I really wanted to stay engaged with industry to make sure that we were working on the critical problems. So to do that, we actually in turn hosted one of these workshops, industrial workshops, here at the lab. Similar type of turnout, about 100 and so industry people. And when I hosted this workshop, this was before I knew what lab resources were available to PIs. And so I was doing, setting up conference rooms, sending out agendas and invitations, and reaching out to publications, all on my own as a PI. Now looking back, I'm kicking myself because I wasted many nights and weekends doing this, but it was a way to learn how to do this kind of event. Now I know that there are people like the conference planning services, like the communications group, that can actually help and support that. But in the first round, we were able to host this workshop. We were able to get a name recognition for ourselves in this space. And from that, we started to spin out SPPs and creatives from this. And I think, looking back and understanding what was the reason for being able to do that, I think, and Jason mentioned it earlier, knowing what your customers, what do they want? What are their main concerns? For industry, obviously it's to sell more product, right? And that can mean two things for us as researchers. You're making their product better, which is a lot of what we try to do as researchers. But the other thing is the companies also want to be able to show that they're actually working on the cutting edge of research. There's a lot of these companies, very big companies, can have their own R&D teams, but it's difficult when they go to their customers and say, hey, we're at the cutting edge. We developed this widget internally, and now I'm going to sell it to you. It's better than anything else. But if they can say, hey, we're working with Argonne National Labs or other universities or so on, it gives them a bit of credibility. And I learned that kind of through this process is, be wary of that. Be mindful of the fact that, it's maybe not just improving their product, but it's also helping them represent themselves as being on the cutting edge. I think, looking back, I think the important thing to remember when you're establishing this is, again, listening to who your customers are, identifying what their main needs are. The next, let me see if I had anything else I wanted to mention here. Before I go on, any questions? Again, I want to make this more of a dialogue. Any questions about my experiences at DOE or the WIN program development?
So, can you tell us how long a time period this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I had that on there. From the moment, so like I said, I was a year into my postdoc. I went and did the M&O detail for 15 months, so a little over a year. This was back in 2012 that I came back. At that point, I was looking at a few $100K project from DOE. It took me another, I would say, 2 years with that project, building up the technology, building up the reputation, putting out papers, going to conferences to start to spark the interest of industry. At that point in 2 years, I had industry coming to me and calling me and saying, we recognize that you guys are the leaders in the field on this topic area, and we're hearing from our customers that they want us to work with you. So at first, it wasn't the fact that I had to go out and actively sell. They were actually coming to me. So that was about 2 years with the DOE program, and we've been doing SPPs and creatives for the last 2.5, 3 years. So it takes time, and that's another thing is I don't think you can expect that you're gonna, go tomorrow and say, I have this idea, I'm gonna go out and within 6 months I'm gonna have an SPP signed. For one, it takes a long time just to get SPP signed and agreements through. But it does take time. And that's why I say I think it's important to also be realistic about your expectations in terms of broadening out to other stakeholders beyond DOE. Leverage the work that you're doing that's sponsored by DOE, but really look outwardly facing and seeing what are the opportunities to work with industry while you're doing that.
Hi.
Yes,
I'm Pierre. So I'm a postdoc here, and basically I hear a lot do the name recognition thing, and I don't always hear exactly what are the steps that are taken to do that in terms of, is it just going to conferences or actually kind of like doing something that's unique to you in terms of how your lab functions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think name recognition comes in two ways. Obviously just being associated with the lab, like Jason was saying, when you approach, you can say, I'm from Argonne. You carry that institutional name recognition. But the more important thing is your name recognition, right? something that you're working on specifically. You know, it's always best if you're doing working on a specific topic area to build your name recognition around that topic area. So
in your case, how did you go about kind of putting your name out there?
Yeah, so for me, you know, it was maybe a factor of good timing and luck, but also effort. So the topic area, without getting too technical, so we were looking at a failure mechanism of how bearings were failing in the wind turbines. This was a very unique type of failure mechanism. It wasn't related to specifically to how people have been studying things in the past decades. So it was unique. It was something the industry was afflicted with, to the point where I had one CEO come up to me afterwards after I presented and said, you can't mention the name of my company, but just know that this failure mechanism caused our company to fail. So we were working on something that was very relevant to industry. So that gives us a leg up because it was something of heightened interest. And then we just took that DOE investment, started to do the research. In the meantime, we started to do things like host those workshops. And we weren't coming into those initial workshops as, hey, we're the experts in this, but we were hosting it. We were inviting companies that were dealing with this issue, been working on it longer than we had. We also presented our current research.
This is a test of the site-wide emergency notification system. This is a test.
And through that, I think we started to get that name recognition of through the workshops, through presenting at conferences. Publications are hard. I don't rely on publications to get your name out there because it just takes so much time. And even when you're getting a publication out there, sometimes sometimes companies are very slow to consuming that material. They might get it, some of these companies don't have access to the journal articles that we do. They might get it from, you know, someone who found it. So, you know, trade journal publications I think are important too. We were actively going out and actually pitching this to our own trade journals. Now we know that there's people like Alex who are much better at doing that than I am, who work in the communications team. So think of the things that are going to get your name out there very quickly. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions on that part of it? So I can speak a little bit. How am I doing on time? 5, okay. So I'll end with speaking about the current activities. And so now I'm actually sharing my time between Energy Systems Division and Argonne Design Works. Those of you who are not familiar, Argonne Design Works is a center here that's intended to be cross-divisional, cross-directorate. So that enables us to drive new initiatives that touch on various aspects of the lab. So through the Launchpad program that I worked on last year, we started to develop the concept of how Argonne can position themselves in the space of additive manufacturing. And so we were doing some really interesting work. Actually here at APS, Tao Sung was initiated some really exploratory work of looking at this sintering process in situ with the X-ray. And so we took that and started to try to build a program around it, see what other aspects of the lab we can bring into this space, from computational simulations to testing and characterization. And so we're currently in the process of, through the investment from the lab, you know, through LDRDs, building this name recognition again, trying to establish ourselves in this community, and hopefully, eventually, we'll be getting to the point where we're bringing in some external support. This has been a little bit of a different experience for me because it doesn't rely just on my own research. I'm trying to pull together researchers from all across the lab, and this it's an exciting new opportunity. And I think if it does get to the point where we get some momentum, it has the potential to be a much bigger program than what we have done in the previous successes. So, yeah, with that, I will end. I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll take any additional questions. Yes.
You mentioned the resources available at the lab to do all this PR, I guess.
Yeah.
Other than getting this fact sheet that tells us about this program, how do we get involved with those types of people? Are they cost recovery? And then most of us are on programmatic funding, so we don't have a lot of time to spend on developing this extra stuff. So how do we start that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I'm not sure if I'm the perfect person to answer that question, but I just want to make you aware that they are available. Things like the conference planning services are actually, from my understanding, free. So if you are wanting to host a workshop, look up conference planning services. They can basically do everything from sending emails to taking registration to setting up the conference room and getting people registered and so forth. To the question of how to get money to spend effort on, I think that's always case dependent and divisional dependent, because each division and directorate has their own program development funds. You usually have to go to those people that can control those funds to ask for it. Other than that, programs like, as you know, the Launchpad program are things that TCP operates. But Suresh, if you have anything.
If I could just add, everything that Aaron said is correct, but maybe the place to start is, so every directorate, most divisions have a deployed business development person from TCP and a communications lead from SEPA. If you have interest in engaging on any of these or looking for resources on any of these activities, whether it is to build your profile as a thought leader, whether it is conference support, whether it is related to collateral, publications, et cetera, I would start with one of those two resources. And if you don't know who they are, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to make sure to forward that information, on to you with a copy to them, so they will immediately get back to you, and that's a good place to start. They can share with you kind of the menu of services that are available, the types of stuff that has worked, what might, what does cost money, and what is something that we could do, because it's all baked into the overhead anyway. So that's the place I would start, is either the business development resource or the SEPA resource that is supporting your division. And it is available on the intranet, this information as well, but feel free. I think you can pretty much talk to anyone at TCP or anyone at SEPA and get that information. And as Alex is pointing out, I think, I can't find it that quickly, but if you don't mind putting that up, hopefully you're picking up that. We thought that one chart takeaway or one piece, if you haven't picked it up, it's outside. Definitely pick it up. That information is available on the intranet as well. But if you have this, I think it's a great one-page quick cheat sheet of whom to call. Feel free to triangulate to the right resource as well.